In this episode, Golden and I discuss Superman and Lois, Season 1, Full Speed Ahead.
The Omega Beam. Full power. The Omega Beam.
Welcome to the Omega Beam, number 138. I'm your host, Oren Merton. So there's a certain irony to the CW introducing a brand new superhero show into their Arrowverse when Arrow itself is no longer on the air, but that is what happened. We were introduced to this Superman and this Lois Lane while the Arrowverse was still going, so it does make sense. So season 1 of the new show, Superman and Lois, has finished streaming on the CW and is available both on the CW and I believe by the time this comes out on Netflix. If it isn't on Netflix, then it will be momentarily. So now that it's out, it's time to discuss it. The first half of our discussion is spoiler-free, and then we get into spoilers. So you can listen to the first half no matter how much you've seen. So let's go. I am here with Golden to talk about Superman and Lois, the latest new superhero show that debuted on the CW. The entire season is now streaming for free on the CW, and I believe that they have a deal with Netflix where like a week later or something, it shows up on Netflix. So if you haven't seen it, the whole season should be streaming on Netflix momentarily, if it isn't already by the time you're listening to this. So when you first found out about this show, were you looking forward to it?
No, not at all.
I wasn't either.
I wasn't too keen on, the characters showed up in Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Right.
It showed up in Supergirl.
Exactly. We had seen Tyler Hoechlin, I think I pronounce his name, and Elizabeth Tulloch. We'd already seen them as Superman and Lois in Supergirl. I don't remember. I think they brought him in season 2 or something in Supergirl. So he'd already been in this Arrowverse for
which was, kind of, nice to see them.
Yeah.
But I wasn't too excited about seeing Superman and Lois.
Especially when I read the pitch, it was like Superman and Lois raising kids. It's like, okay, a good family drama is good. Obviously as a married man with a child, certainly that's something that is meaningful to me, but in a superhero story? So yeah, I came into this not that excited. Then I saw the first trailer and I started to get excited because I was worried that it was either going to be really boring and there'd be no superheroics. It would be, Dawson's Creek with superheroes basically. Or that it was just going to be a gimmick, that the family was just a gimmick and that was just kind of a way to sell a standard superhero show, which can be good, but then why, have these family members that show up for 5 minutes an episode?
I don't think it really had me until the first episode.
Yeah.
And as soon as we watched the first episode, I totally bought in.
Absolutely. The pilot was really well done.
I was only disappointed at the fact that there was all of a sudden, there was this break.
Right.
And we couldn't finish watching it.
Yeah. And everything I was worried by the sort of pitch that it was either going to just be Dawson's Creek with superheroes or it was going to be just a superhero show with a family as a gimmick for 5 minutes an episode. No, they nailed it. They really showed you a man doing superheroics and saving the world and involved as a superhero and struggling to be there for his kids when he has to be all over the world at the same time. That was very compelling. And the fact that it also was done with such a high production value. This series must have had a pretty high budget. Now, admittedly, the CW normally does like 22 episodes for their full seasons of their, full season shows. This one only got 15. I would not be surprised if the reason is because they just took that budget and spread it over fewer shows so they could make them look better. But yeah, the visuals were absolutely stunning. I think the 2 young actors who play Superman's kids, as you pointed out to me, a boy named Jordan plays Jonathan, and then a boy named Alex plays Jordan. So Jordan is John, and that's got to be a little confusing. But they do great jobs. They don't overplay the high school drama, but it is definitely there. And you definitely get a sense that these are not kids who are necessarily super comfortable in school. And it's done really, really well.
Yeah, I think that this is still kind of what was the Arrowverse.
Mm-hmm.
And the Arrowverse was still, to me, it was kind of grounded in reality, but it was still a little fantastic. It was still a little bit more comic book.
Mm-hmm.
You got Supergirl, you have The Flash, and all of those, even though it's Earth, still feel like they're more, I don't want to necessarily say surreal, but fantasy.
Yeah, they're very fantasy.
And then you have Superman and Lois. And this one, I believe I could get in my car and drive to Smallville.
I agree. This is the most grounded. And in fact, it's interesting along exactly the lines you're talking about. I checked out the Rotten Tomatoes after we saw it and enjoyed it. 88% Rotten Tomatoes. And the critic consensus is, although it may be a bit too grounded for some viewers, Superman and Lois draws strength from unexpected places without skimping on the action to carve its own path in a crowded superhero universe. And I think that's a good summary. And I think you pointed out how grounded it is. And the consensus points out another reality, which is that a lot of superhero fans, they do want the fantasy. They don't want it to happen next door, so to speak, or a place they can drive to. They want it to be Fantasyland. And I agree with you that one of the strengths of Superman and Lois is that it takes basically a sun god character and plants him in our world in an incredibly grounded way. And to me, that makes the stories deeper. That gives it more texture, more depth, and made them more engaging. A lot of these CW shows, they kind of, what they've got in the formula of doing, and it's a formula that works, so I understand why they do it, is they sort of pivot villains halfway through. That they've kind of realized when they try and stretch one villain for, an entire season, you end up having too many filler episodes. So if you have two villains, they kind of put two arcs that blend together and it works much better. So for the first half, the villain is this strange mystery guy whom is not whom he says he is. We might go into spoilers later in this, but right now I'm keeping it very vague. And eventually that gets resolved. And then the second half is a character that is brought up, and the one that's in the trailers and is in the summary description on Google, a character named Morgan Edge, who's this like big corporate, kind of sleazy corporate dude that we're introduced to from the beginning. So he's not like a new guy brought in just for the second half. But the first half really focuses on another character as the villain. The second half, he gets his moment in the sun, so to speak. And I think it was handled really well. This show managed to do something that I think good writing does, is that it takes me in a direction, or it takes me places I didn't think it was going to go, while at the same time giving me the emotional resolution that I wanted.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of dealing with real life issues.
Yeah. I agree.
There's a lot of different aspects of trauma that come up throughout the season. And how do you deal with that? What are the expectations on teenagers?
Right.
And what is it like? What are they dealing with in schools? And the pandemic didn't come into this one.
No.
Some of the different series, the pandemic actually has happened, but this one kind of skipped it. I know at one point you made a comment about, wow, they're still using flip phones.
Yeah.
But maybe their technology isn't advanced in this reality.
Right.
It is interesting that there is another character whose technology is more advanced. But I really enjoyed watching the characters play out and their relationship to each other.
Yeah, I agree. And before we do go into some spoilers later, I just want to say in the spoiler-free section that anyone can listen to, that these are, like we said, we'd already met this Superman and Lois before, but I said it before and I'll say it again. Tyler Hoechlin is my Superman. He is to me a embodiment of the Superman in the comics that I read. He is a happy warrior. He's not, it's not like he's all smiles and the big blue Boy Scout. He gets sad. He gets angry. He has to control himself. There's a lot going on in his life, and he faces it the way any emotional being would. Not always the most mature way. He's always good and noble. And that is why he is Superman. He has all these powers, of course. He's a sun god. But he's Superman because despite how much he could do, and despite all these emotions, he is always a noble and good man. And I appreciate that very, very deeply, which is not to say, you've heard me say on other episodes that how much I love Henry Cavill. And I do. Henry Cavill's great. But Zack Snyder wrote a different kind of Superman, a younger Superman, a Superman in a different part of life, etc. This is the more mature, married Superman from the later comics that I adore. And I think he absolutely nails the part. He inhabits the part as you would want someone who leads, who is first on the call sheet in a superhero show. They picked the right guy. And I have to say, I was not the biggest fan of Elizabeth Tulloch as Lois Lane, but I think she's done fine. I think, she's definitely a believable Lois Lane, and she certainly plays a woman with power, I think, very well.
And that's interesting because she didn't really start with that power.
Yeah, I agree.
In Grimm.
Mm-hmm.
You never watched
I never
Grimm.
watched Grimm, but I know she's in it. Yeah.
In Grimm, she, by the end of that series, she kind of found herself and her power.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and now she's playing what is supposed to technically be the most famous journalist in the world. But yeah, I mean, and they make a couple that you can imagine as a real couple. I mean, they support each other like a couple. They squabble like a couple. I mean, it comes across as very grounded and very, it comes across as a relationship that you would imagine people who have kids together and have just been together and have all that shared time and memory together. All that when they communicate, it's all that is behind it. And I think the writers did a good job of making that real. And I think that the actors do a good job of playing it real.
Yeah, it's a very strong cast.
Yeah, yeah.
And with one of the characters that's brought in from a different Earth,
mm-hmm.
and what he's dealing with. And I think we're kind of entering into spoilers here. 3, 2, 1, spoilers. Okay. So
spoiler warning now.
So, I mean, he's here and he thinks that Superman is bad.
Mm-hmm.
The Superman can't be good.
Right.
And he's seeing his wife who he's lost.
Right.
And to eventually find out that she's married to Superman. And that's why she knows how good he is. And having that friendship. And I did very much like at the end of the season where he's like, I can't stay here.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I see my wife. I know you're happy. I want you to be happy. But watching you is just, and he's going to go find his family when his family shows up on the doorstep.
When his family shows up, that was an unexpected
And now
twist.
you have this whole thing about, well, she's looking at Lois like, oh, there's mom.
And he's like, well.
But it's not mom.
Yeah.
And hey, here you're half brothers.
Right. So talking about John Henry Irons, who you started talking about, the character. So again, this is a situation where I think being a comic reader, I had a certain expectation. And as you know, for like the first half of the season, I was kind of a little bit reserved and not that thrilled because in the comics, John Henry Irons was always one of Superman's best friends. And he was a defender of Superman. He was one of the people who came in, I think, during the replacement era of Superman when Superman had died, and he was trying to fill the shoes and protect the legacy and everything. And he's always been just this great defender and this, wonderful person. And so we are first introduced to him as Captain Luthor, and we think, well, wait a minute, but people tend to their doppelgangers kind of look alike in other worlds. Why doesn't Lex look like Lex?
Well, there's a couple people that have changed. I mean, Lois's father changed.
Right.
There were, I think, a couple that appeared in Supergirl And Morgan Edge might have been one of those.
They might have had a different Morgan Edge.
I think in the IMDb trivia, it talks about how Morgan Edge was cast differently in Supergirl.
Yeah. So, that was a little confusing. And then we find out he's John Henry Irons. And as soon as we find that out, I was immediately feeling like, I don't know, I really like Steel, the name of his character in the comics. I really like Steel being like his buddy. And now he's like trying to kill him and all this stuff. But I think even though it started from a place that I wasn't sure I wanted it to be, like I said, this series has been really good at taking me places I did not expect to go, but giving me the resolution I wanted and leaving me satisfying. So at the end, they are friends.
I don't know necessarily that it's that they're friends. It's that they implicitly trust one another.
Yes, they trust each other completely.
Yes, I don't think they're best friends, but there is a level of trust that never would have been expected in the first couple episodes.
That's a good way to put it. That there's just an implicit trust and that they'll work together incredibly well because they know they have each other's back. And
this is an interesting little trivia.
Okay.
From IMDb trivia, that it is the quickest the shows to be renewed for season 2. I believe it was renewed after episode 2 aired.
I believe that I read that the pilot of Superman and Lois was the number 1 pilot or got the highest ratings of any superhero drama on the CW or perhaps anywhere, but certainly the CW, that its ratings were the highest. And it's interesting because some of it, I think, is because people were just really excited by the pilot, by the trailer, that the trailer was a lot better than I think anybody was expecting. But I also have to think that part of it is, and again, no cut on Henry Cavill, who I absolutely adore as Superman, but Zack Snyder's vision of the DC universe was not the comic book vision. He did not have that vision. And this is that Superman. I think a lot of people who love Superman were kind of waiting for that Superman to come back. And this was that Superman. And
apparently he was cast without auditioning for the role.
Yeah, they saw him in something else. I mean, I know he's been in more than a few other things. I think he was a regular on, was it Teen Wolf or something?
Yes.
So yeah.
And I guess there's at least one other person that was, I think the IMDb trivia said that one of the people that was in Teen Wolf with him played the younger version in Man of Steel.
Oh, how funny. But yeah, I mean, he's an actor he's had, this is certainly not his first rodeo. He's had a bit of a career. And he's been very well received in all the stuff that he's done. So, yeah, they picked somebody that they knew was going to be up for the role, and he was. He truly was. I think, and like you already talked about the cast and how they were all really good. I think they made an interesting choice by giving the kind of dark and brooding child Superman's powers, but maybe not, Clark Kent's sunny personality, whereas the other one has Clark Kent's sunny personality, but no powers.
You kind of are led to believe in that first episode that it's really Jonathan,
right,
not Jordan, that has it. So when you find out it's Jordan, it's like, yeah, okay, makes sense.
Right. It's interesting, you hear so many, I mean, there were other stories. I know that James Gunn produced a horror movie a while back. I forgot what it was called, like Blind Side or something, where it was kind of a reimagining of what would happen if Superman landed, somewhere else and was a brooding little, troubled bastard and went evil instead of going good. That's not an arc I have any interest in. I think that they did it really well here in that they gave the superpowers to the dark and brooding kid, but that dark and brooding kid, I mean, number one, he's Superman and Lois Lane's son, so he has been just absolutely taught morality and morals and kindness since the day he was born. But it also put him in a situation where he's in a family where they know how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is an interesting avenue to explore, and I'm glad that they are exploring it.
I like how it started out with the barbecue, and they were odd man out.
Right.
And really didn't necessarily feel welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends with a barbecue.
Right.
And they're all together.
And they've come together, yeah.
And now it's community.
Yeah. Absolutely. The season was well written, and it was definitely of a piece. And I think that made the whole also very satisfying. And when I look at where they've come, where they've gone, what they're doing, and that they were renewed and what they've set up for next season, I'm excited to see where it's going to go, because the world is open. They didn't end it with, and this is our big bad for next season. They left it completely and totally wide open to what the villain is going to be. They just set up a whole lot of drama that can happen within that next season, which I think is really interesting. And speaking of villains, we talked about John Henry Irons going from villain to hero. Well, Morgan Edge, as we find out, they turned him into it's really interesting. Morgan Edge is a character in the comics, and he becomes this brand new character that they just created solely for the series. A Kryptonian who is the half-brother named Tal Rowe, the half-brother of Kal-El, which, same mother, different dad. That's brand new, just for the show, new mythology. But then he goes from Tal Rowe and he becomes another comic villain, the Eradicator, which is interesting that this one character, Morgan Edge, is actually sort of three characters in one, two of which are from the comics. One is original. And I have to say, Adam Rayner he really does a fantastic job. He plays, his character is kind of the mustache twirling villain, but at the same time, he plays him to not be mustache twirling and to really, to have a need that he wants filled. He's almost reluctantly beating up on Superman. Not so reluctantly about planet Earth. He doesn't really care much about it.
But he is a product of his father.
Yeah.
Of the cruelty of his father.
Right. And
his father basically broke him.
Yeah, he broke him. He was just the most abusive dad. And it's interesting how you brought up the way it comes full circle from barbecue to barbecue. It's also about fathers, that as a father, we see his relationship, when he has trouble with his own son and he doesn't know what to do with his own son who just got powers. The first person he goes to is his father's AI, because he has that great relationship with his father. His father's AI. He had a wonderful relationship with Jonathan Kent, his adoptive father, who, helped form the man that he became. But he also has a great relationship with Jor-El, with the AI of his father who came with him to Earth. So he is buoyed and built by these great relationships. And here we have Tal Rowe / Morgan Edge / Eradicator, who has no relationship with an adoptive father, who is just broken and beaten by his father's AI. And he basically has to raise himself in an angry, bitter void. And he becomes what he becomes. And ultimately, in the end, when he's finally laid low, his final line to Superman is, "All I ever wanted was family." And you feel it. You feel him because you know what he's been through.
And had that not happened, had he not been warped by his father and shown up and said, "Hey, I'm your half brother," he would have been welcomed in.
And that's exactly what Superman says. That you had it. You had it. When he found out that he was related, and when Kal-El found out he was related to Tal Rowe, he was willing to accept him, just not the bullshit he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that last episode, which we already started talking about, it ends with Superman, Clark Kent, and his family tearfully burying the AI of his dad, basically giving his dad a funeral on Earth. And it comes full circle to that idea of family and how important it is, and how important fatherhood was to the person that he ultimately became. And it's funny to think that this superhero show with action scenes in every episode and huge CG battles and everything else was ultimately about raising a family and about how we are influenced and affected and formed and either built or broken by our family or lack thereof. But it really was. This really was about family.
Yeah,
I think in a great way.
It is still hard to believe that Lois Lane would just go to a small town and stay there, considering who she is.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, you'd also think, I mean, any show like this, it has to take some liberties, and they could have obviously. They set up that Lois had to leave the Daily Planet because Morgan Edge bought it, but she could still have been like a consulting reporter to some
Wonder
other.
who owns it now.
Yeah, exactly. They could have. Well, now she co-owns the.
Yeah, but who owns the planet?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, the other one that is a little bit hard to believe is that her father has retired.
Yeah, I'm guessing he's not retired, or he may want to retire, but I'm betting in season 2, he
has to go back.
He will find himself pulled back into the game. It's sort of that he wanted to retire, but he couldn't retire. Yeah, I thought that they, General Lane in the comics is known to be kind of a jerk. They've got Dylan Walsh playing him really well. And, it's like he's a grandfather. He's a father-in-law. He's obviously the father of his daughter, Lois. And he kind of was always Army first in the comics. And I think he was true to that in this series.
He was true to that, but there was also, this is my grandson.
Right. And right. They did a good job of showing that he cares, that he is a man who cares. It's just his way of caring has always been to throw himself in trying to save the world, or at least America's corner of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by the end, he realizes that saving America is great. And yes, that does save his family because they are in America. But at the same time, maybe he should also spend a little bit more time with that family.
If you feel like the Berlanti shows have kind of started to go off the rails or aren't what you really loved about them, you will not be disappointed here.
Yeah.
This is not just a fresh start, I think, for Superman and Lois, but I feel like it's fresh compared to the other shows.
I think that's a great way to put it. This had, the reality of our real Earth and shooting a television series during a pandemic is that each of these shows were in their little bubble, and so they couldn't do a crossover. It was just not possible. But they did manage to bring Diggle in because David Ramses, the actor, directed a couple episodes.
That wasn't necessarily a highlight for me. It's just, hey, Diggle's going to show up on this one. Okay, Diggle's going to show up on that one too.
Right. So they were able to bring him in.
The crossover was Diggle showing up in a couple of shows.
Right. That was the closest you could get to a crossover because he wasn't on a cast of a show. He was just a freelance director. But I do believe that as the pandemic winds down over the years, and we don't know how long it's going to go on, but I believe the plan is, especially now that Supergirl is shutting down, they do plan on having, I think, Melissa Benoist show up maybe for an episode or two just to make the connection.
It's interesting because on the IMDb trivia, people are saying that they've heard that both Supergirl and Lex Luthor may be recast for this show.
Well, here's an interesting thing to think about. And I was thinking about this. Now, in Crisis on Infinite Earths, when we meet, the cast of all of these shows together, Superman and Lois do not have a child yet, and Melissa Benoist is Supergirl. Now, this is like, 15 years later, 16 years later, 17?
I think that there was something about the fact that at the end of Crisis, he finds out he has kids or something like that.
Oh, does he? So
that's what it...
Yeah, because otherwise...
kind of like Diggle all of a sudden having a different child.
Because otherwise you couldn't have Melissa play Supergirl because it would have to be somebody, 15 years older. But then that wouldn't be the case because they brought... Right. Well, and they brought Diggle in anyway. I mean, by bringing Diggle in, they showed that this is the same... Yeah. Somehow the timelines, you know what? It's a superhero show. I don't care about the timelines. I just, I enjoy I really enjoy the crossovers. They're some of my favorite things. We've said it in other episodes. I'll say it again. Crisis on Infinite Earths is a great 5-episode crossover. Just absolutely excellent. Even if you don't watch this show or that show, just watch the crossover.
May have to go watch the end of it just to see if it shows that he has kids right at the end.
I know. Now I kind of want to watch the crossover again just to get all that.
Maybe I love the end.
I love the whole thing. I would watch the whole thing again. But anyway, I do hope in the future there is more than just, hey, Diggle's here. Hi, Diggle. But there's like more of a crossover because I do enjoy those. I enjoy the connected universe. This season didn't need it. It absolutely did not need any kind of crossover.
Well, the show didn't need it.
Yeah, the show didn't need it.
If Diggle had not shown up and it had just been some random other person,
would have changed nothing.
It would have been fine.
Yep, wouldn't have changed a thing. It was just fan service. It was just, oh yeah, Arrowverse. Hey, he's from Arrow. Woo! It would have been absolutely fine. But I would like to see some crossovers. If there aren't crossovers, either because the pandemic is still raging at the time they're filming, or because they just write a bunch of scripts and say, you know what, we don't need a crossover. Either way, it's all good. I'd like to see it, but I don't need it. Just be fun. Fan service for me.
I look forward to the next season.
Yeah.
It can't come soon enough. Yes. I really think that this is quality TV, fantasy drama.
Completely agree.
Well done.
Absolutely, completely agree. If you also haven't been considering this show because you thought, oh, Superman and Lois, I don't know, Superman's dad, whatever. It really is worth your time. It really is worth seeing. We also were not positive going in, but we were totally sold by it. And it's just a great Superman show. It's a great superhero show. It's a great Superman show. It's a great sci-fi family drama. Thank you, Golden.
You're welcome.
And that's it for this episode. You can find the show notes at theomegabeam.com/138. If you liked this episode, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It's your reviews that help people who like this stuff find our podcast. If you have any comments or suggestions, please drop us a line at info@theomegabeam.com. Be good to yourselves and each other, and we'll catch you next time.
The Omega Beam. Full stop.